Late bottle vintage is a category of port that has been a bit confused, has a history that we don't know exactly, but we have some memories about. And the LBV was a wine that was made for, and we used to call colheita tardia. And all the houses talk about that, even Noval and Ramos Pinto and the houses, everybody talk about colheita tardia. But in fact, I think it was tailors that decided to fight for that LBV should be a special category of port wine. And when they decided, and Port Wine Institute agree about that, they asked the houses to register the LBV. And in fact, Ramos Pinto has the oldest LBV, 1927, that was registered at that moment. But the commercial effort and the effort for the special category, I think it was Taylor, the one that worked for that. Well, for the trade was very important because we had the vintage, but the vintage, as you know, it's a wine that is difficult to drink in the first 15 years, especially at that time. So we had a wine that was late bottle vintage, 4 or 6 years later, and that wine was more developed, so it was a wine that the sector could offer, a wine close to the vintage, but to be drink earlier. So it became something very special and still very important for the commercial part of the port wine.
Late bottle vintage started when I came back in 1967 to Portugal. And at that time, the only ports that had a date were vintage port. And the one variation on the vintage port with a date was late bottle vintage that our friends at Ramos Pinto had. But what I went in and asked is if we could have late bottle vintage bottled in Portugal. And instead of having the idea of it being with a driven cork, say it had age in bottle, that it would, if I may have that bottle, that it would have a stopper cork. It'd be fined and filtered with a stopper cork and therefore ready for drinking. And that we started in 1970 with the 1964 vintage. And I think a lot of the old trade said that it was shouldn't allow that sort of thing. Vintage port was the only thing to have a date. And I remember hearing that it was going to be very bad for the vintage port, but luckily the first people to be hurt was Taylor, so that's all right. In any case, delighted to say it was a success. The restaurants particularly, and by the end of the 70s, I think about 78 it was, Graham's followed us and had it, and then of course now everybody has a late bottle vintage of one sort or another, which is great because it's brought the whole volume up. By 1982, when the first time the Institute had figures, we were up to 35,000 cases. And now it's about 4 million bottles a year. And there we have it. It's got a date, it's got the day of bottling, it's ready for drinking, and it goes perfectly with chocolate and other puddings and by itself. So have a glass.
We started to produce Douro wines many years ago, more precisely, I think more 6 years ago with Barca Velha. Now we have 7 different brands and we sold more than 80 million bottles of Douro wine a year. That happens because we always believe in Douro as a region. Sometimes we could profit our knowledge about port, the art of blending port, and we could use that in the Douro, blending different varieties, different altitudes, different expositions to produce every year the best wines. Like that, we feel we could be in the future pair of the best wine world in the region. Of course, we still have a lot of work to do, but I think we are in the right way and we arrived where we desire.
So we decided to invest on making table wine in our property, like many other people here in the Douro. The problem was almost 20 years ago, the port production, it was very stable, didn't change in the past 20 years. So all the properties like Valmião and other quintas here had a surplus of grapes that with no use at all. So when we started, I think I'm a little bit surprised by the awards and the scores and the recognition we have since the beginning. Someone tell me that when we started we were going to be top 4 in the world in Wine Spectator or other magazines. It's really fantastic. For me, it's surprising. And it's not surprising to the growth volume of Douro table wine. I think now it's around 40% of the sales of port wine. And my prediction for the future, it's going to be more than port. So I think the port institutes and the big players in port wine business, if they don't change the rules for certain new system, the port is going to be stable in the future, and table wine is going to grow a lot. Unfortunately, we don't have some help that like the Italians or the Spanish have, because they're on gastronomy all over the world. We don't have that, but I think step by step, dry wine, it's a slowing process. I think in the future, maybe in 40, 50 years, we can be in the same stage that the Italians and French are today. But definitely, I think Douro wines are going to increase in volume and quality too.
Looking back at the times when we started in the Douro, soon became clear that it was very important for the region to do something with the grapes that were not used to make port. So between 1985 and 1993, somehow me and a few others prepared ourselves for the future, not knowing exactly what that future will be, when it would start, and how it would start. Our responsibility as families and people who've been working in the Douro for so many centuries, giving back to the region what the region has given us in so many ways. It was our need, because it was the only way that independent properties, quintas, would be able to survive, creating their own businesses, and a challenge would be able to transform grapes, which undoubtedly make one of the best wines of the world, port, into something of relevance, and that one day, sooner or later, would be able to achieve not only the profitability but the image that port has had all these centuries. And I think that in these last 20 years, we were able to do that. I had no idea the speed it would come. It was faster than I personally expected, I can say. In the wine world, in such a competitive wine world, to create and to position yourself as a reference, not only for your country, but also the Douro is now regarded as one of the regions for fine dry wines, as it is for port. And to understand that between 2004 and 2014, the Douro has doubled sales, and it has overcome the 100 million euros target 2 years ago, and last year has even surpassed 120 million euros of sales, and is now representing 40% of port, is an incredible achievement for a region that has actually started producing wine and relevant Douro wine only less than 20 years ago.
Here we are at the famous lagars of Quinta do Naval. Although this may seem a primitive way of making port wines, it is still the best way to make great vintage ports. Our goal here is to produce powerful wines, harmonious wines, elegant expressions of the terroir. In 1994, Noval undertook the job to create a machine, a robot, that would sustain this method in the future. So we launched a pioneering project to build and design a robot that would aid us with this method. So in 1995 we had the first prototype at work, so it was a milestone for Quinta de Noval. In 1996 we made some adjustments to this machine, and since then it has been indispensable for its work in the lagars. So we had succeeded to build the first robotic treader in the Douro, and it can replace human treading in part or totally. We use human treading in the first phase and the robotic treading in the second phase of the maceration. In the past 20 years we've had excellent results, and proof of that is our 94, 97, 2011 vintage ports that were reviewed internationally with 4 perfect scores of 100 points. Some other companies have also undertaken this process in making their port wines, because we believe they think this is also the best way to make ports, and using the robotic treaders is indispensable to create great ports. They have designs similar to this one, slightly different or completely different, but the goal is always the same: to produce magnificent Douro wines from these great terroirs.
Until the late 80s, the best wines in the Douro were made trodden by foot in traditional granite lagage. At that stage, it became increasingly difficult to find workers to tread lagage. So we looked to develop a mechanization of this system, which was an interesting process, which we had to examine the traditional method of making port in lagage, and then devise a machine that would do the same thing in terms of quality, but eliminate the faults and the disadvantages of the traditional system. We've come up with this system of lagage made in stainless steel, which basically allows us to produce wines of top quality, and it also allows us to control fermentations in a way that's not possible in a traditional lagard, partly through the heating and cooling systems that we use. And it allows us to produce considerable quantities of wine, not only in this winery, but in several other wineries. This has changed our company mainly in the fact that we have been incredibly successful in producing some of the top quality wines, port wines in the world.
The main strategic reason to go into wine tourism was to help us to develop our brand. We celebrate this year 300 years, but since 25 years ago we operate under a new brand, the brand Quinta do Valado, as the brand Ferreira, which was the family brand, was sold 25 years ago. So we believe that having wine tourism would help us strongly to develop our brand. More operational or more short-term reasons for going into wine tourism, things like the public subsidies that were available to invest in this area, and also the synergies with our wine production activity. We now realize that we are very successful in this strategy. It now accounts for approximately 15% of our turnover. Our brand is now pretty well known and successful, and the wine tourism activity was very helpful for that. We make profits on this activity on its own. We have a lot of press because of the wine tourism activity. We had here in this place that was inaugurated a few months ago, we already had the Financial Times, the Wallpaper, the Travel and Leisure, the House and Garden. We receive a lot of visitors, like 10,000 a year, and that is very good to develop our brand, and also is a very strong database for the future. So we'll continue to develop this activity. in the Douro and probably also in the Porto, where the tourism industry is growing very strongly.
Wine tourism is starting to be in Douro Valley more and more trendy. We are offering now a wine destiny all around the world. So we opened this wine tourism almost 11 years ago, and the idea is to show to the final consumer what is a quinta behind the bottle, so what is the type of wine behind the bottle. We've received many guests all around the world. In fact, we just mainly work with international tourism. It shows a big success. In the first years, we start growing about 20% per year. And last year, we improved our sales in 40%. The type of people that we get is wine enthusiasts and wine curious people that really come here through the quality and for all the wine tourists that more and more start to be more integrated. So this year we are expecting about 15,000 tourists all over the world, not only from Europe. We started the first project in 2005. We just a hotel. So then 5 years after we opened our winery restaurant, and this year we also will open a new wine shop together with a new wine tasting area. If we want to develop more, yes, of course. We believe very much in the wine tourism. We are very glad, in fact, and it's a very nice way to promote your products, to gain more and more brand awareness. So I think the consumer, not only a brand awareness, but the consumer can really enjoy the Quinta philosophy, and he can feel that he was here. You will never forget about the brand anymore in his life. Next year, we are planning to develop even more our wine tourism project with a new wine museum here. And this way, together also with a walking tour that we have in the whole property for around 12 kilometers. We hope to have a full offer in order to the client can spend here the full day with us or half of the day. So this is our goal, is to get the tourism here, the client here, that he can feel the joy of a quinta, the joy of the wine producer, and be very comfortable with us and spend and live how we call the spirit of Douro Valley.
We have a strong belief that wine tourism is a real excellent area for growth for a good wine producer. Our experience of having our cellars open in Vila Nova de Gaia for many, many years has been a really good one. To begin with, it was a bit tentative, but we gradually realized that more and more people are interested in where the wine comes from, who makes the wine, the people behind it. And we extended recently this experience to opening our vineyard at Quinta de Bonfim in the Douro. The access to the Douro is improving dramatically. There's a new tunnel opening in a few weeks' time. Tourists are really interested in visiting beautiful wine regions, and there are few wine regions as beautiful, in fact none as beautiful as the Douro. We opened in May last year. The results have been really outstanding. We're delighted. We have people from all over, people from the USA, from Japan, China, the UK, from Lisbon, and they come with one objective. They want to really enjoy the beauty of the Douro, and we've won various really excellent prizes for our wines, and I think people come and knock on the door. They want to see, who are these guys? Who makes this wine? How do they do it? How do they live? What is the environment in which these wines are made? And to give people the opportunity to walk around the vineyards, to actually touch the soil and feel the heat on their backs as they walk through the vineyards, and it's working extremely well. And I think in future we see more opportunities in this area of wine tourism. For us, the word of mouth is probably the most powerful tool for marketing of wine. If you have somebody saying, I like these wines, your friends will normally follow that indicator. So to be able to receive people in your vineyard or in your cellars and receive them well, give them a good tasting, tell them about what you do, is really perhaps the most powerful way of getting our wines better known around the world. So we're extremely pleased, and it's an area that we will continue to invest in.
So the story of Sion is one of great interest, I think, because it has demonstrated just how fine some of these very old rare ports are. As a trade, of course, we have been producing wonderful aged tawnies for many, many years, but historically these very old wines used to be blended away. Many of companies, of course, have them. But we, with Scion, took an opportunity to bring to the market a unique wine from 1855. So it predates phylloxera. It's very much a piece of history from the Douro. Brought that to the consumers in a uniquely packaged fashion, which I think has been very appealing to high-end consumers who are looking for that extraordinary experience. It was an important step, I think, from the point of view of the port trade, because it did demonstrate the demand that exists for very high products. And many other companies have, of course, been able to find similar wines in their cellars and actually bring them to the market. It created a lot of excitement at the time, and we were fortunate enough to be given 2 pages in Newsweek telling the story of this very old port. But I think the story is really for the consumer, because when they open these very fine old tawnies, things that are 150 years old, they sip this wonderful nectar that comes from the Douro Valley, and they, of course, begin to think about the history of port and what a unique product it is.
5G, I think it's a wine with a very nice story and a nice background. So me and George, we are a young couple that started our company in 2001 by producing table wines, but always with the vision that we wanted also to really focus in port wine because of all this tradition we have, especially on George's family. So 5G was really a goal that we wanted to bottle. It's a port wine that for decades and was kept in George's family warehouse, and it was produced by George's great-grandfather. I think he was a visionary for Douro Valley, because when everybody was escaping from Douro after phylloxera, he invested a lot in the Douro Valley and bought a lot of properties. So at a certain point, he was one of the most important supplier of very old tawnies. And these casks that we still have on our family was port wines that we wanted really to show the world the uniqueness of port can be. This amazing, another level of quality and level of complexity we can achieve with these old tawnies. I think the price that achieved is really worth it, because the amazing of emotions and taste that we can feel on one of these old tawnies, they are amazing. They are truly amazing. I think this is a way that myself and ourselves and other port industries are trying to show this another dimension of and classic port wines can be produced on this region. So I think this is really to people to realize how port is truly amazing.
Offering these really old specialist wines there are 2 conditioning factors. The first and primary one is the quality of the wines. As the wines are aging in our cellars that we have here beside us, we're analysing the wines on an annual basis, and if we believe that they still have more to give and more to develop and improve in quality, they will just stay and they will continue. And so there's no primary reason to say that we set out to age a wine for 132 years with the Nobly. It was just that the successive generations of my family, so my father and uncles, grandfather, great-grandfather, they just aged the wine believing that it still had more to develop. Offering wines of a super premium nature, making a statement, a quality statement for the house, for the image of our wines, and if one considers that a specialist wine, as Graham's Nobly, with 132 years of age, allows it to evolve, and it projects the premium image of our house. Very limited bottlings. We have then evolved this concept of the Nobly with a range of single cask selected wines that allow us to offer smaller quantities, slightly more accessible in price, wines that yet again reaffirm and reinforce the quality credentials for Graham's as a premium port brand.